This podcast is a project of the Climate Designers Network.
Hey, this is Eric. Welcome to episode 7 of Climify. If you are a returning listener, welcome back. And if this is your first time tuning in, thank you so much. What's unique about this program is that at the end, our guest provides a design project infused with climate science, climate justice, sometimes both. So make sure you stick around to see how you can help use your skills to be more involved in climate action. I also wanted to start today by thanking Hari, who left a wonderful review of the show over at Apple Podcasts. I truly appreciate that and all feedback I get. So if you have some, please let me know over on Apple Podcasts or on Instagram. A few years ago, I started getting an insert in my bill from my electric provider with these colorful infographics comparing my energy use to the average neighbor. Whenever I used less energy than them, my bar on the graph was shown in green. Green is good. But when I was worse, it was orange when I looked at them side by side. A lot of time my billing insert showed my home in the orange, and it made me frustrated as I felt I was pretty good with my energy use. I showed this to my partner and we went on a crusade to better insulate our home and do things like install LED light bulbs. It didn't work often enough. But what did work is that we paid better attention to our daily habits based on only a brightly colored bar graph. It became a competition. But imagine if this could go further. What if we could know up to the minute where we were using energy and how much? What if we knew the best time to do laundry to utilize the renewables in our energy grid? Well, according to my guest today, it's coming. And for many across the country, it's already here. I know that we shouldn't have to be the ones always changing what we do to draw down our climate emissions as big energy companies still pump out coal power. But that's the hand we have, and we need to win it. My guest today has gone all in on this demand-side energy design problem working at Opower, a division of Oracle. She's representing the electricity solution from drawdown.org for this season and has some great insights on how you can use your home as a means to prevent the worst of our climate crisis.
I'm Karina van Schaardenburg, and I lead design and research at Opower, which is part of Oracle within the Energy and Water division. And you can find me online, primarily on LinkedIn these days. I'm Karina van Schaardenburg over there.
Karina, thank you for joining me today. I'm glad that you're here, and I have a lot of questions for you about energy and utilities and design. So hope you're ready.
Yeah, I'm excited. Those are 3 of my favorite topics.
It sounds like it. That's what you do every day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So first off, you're at a division of Oracle called Opower. What led you there? Why did you end up working, or how did you end up working at Opower?
I went on a professional journey over the entire arc of my career to really specialize in UX research and design. So that was one arc that brought me to where I am. And the other arc was the personal passion around climate change and climate action. And until I joined Opower, I didn't see a way for those 2 things to come together. So my professional,
Wow.
my personal passion, but I was always on the lookout for a way to basically apply my design and research expertise towards this cause I cared about. And then I found this role, and it has been what I hoped it would be,
Oh,
which is
that's
an
good.
opportunity to really bring those 2 things together and work on really interesting problems, but also feel good about the impact I'm making in the world.
So you're a climate designer.
I am, very much
Good.
so.
Yeah. So you started off in UX design, and is that what you do at Opower, or can you talk to us more about what your role is there?
Yeah, I currently lead the design and research team, which means I'm a professional meeting attendee and strategist, essentially. I'm
You're a
joking, but
teammate, a good teammate.
yeah, yeah. And I love that part of the job is, really understanding people on personal and professional levels and, really understanding what makes us tick as a group. But I really spend a lot of my time thinking about design strategy and like the long-term vision of our product suite and the near-term roadmap we need to put together in order to get us there.
Yeah, so you didn't have any experience and energy before you got there, is that correct?
I didn't, other than the personal passion I had that led me to read books and go to events on the side, but no, professionally, I did not have a background in energy before joining.
And like all designers do, they have to learn about the different client side work that who they're working with, and that's what you did there, I'm assuming, on the
Yeah,
job.
utilities are an incredibly complicated space to be working in. The grid is one of the most complex systems ever designed by humanity.
Is it?
Uh, yeah, there's so much going on because not only is it a huge network system with all these, power plants and nodes, which is the users on the other side, but it's a real-time system. You have to constantly be matching supply and demand because if there's more demand than supply, then you obviously get brownouts and blackouts. The
Yeah.
reverse is also bad because that's how you blow out transformers. And so there's constant real time management happening across the grid, which is really sensitive to, what power plants are online, who's using what when, and how can we nudge the entire system to be more efficient for, the climate as well as finances.
A little thing could be a huge ripple effect in the energy grid. A
Yeah,
little
we want more people to get electric vehicles, for example, but if we get too many electric vehicles behind a transformer without planning for it, it can
oh,
blow out
no.
that transformer. So, awareness is a really important part of creating the grid of the future to like have visibility into what's happening behind the meter and how we can really help those end customers and utilities make good choices, being aware of each other.
Well, I know that, electric vehicles are something that here in the US, I'm reading some of the statistics on it, which I don't have at the top of my head right now, but the amount of EVs is increasing quite considerably. And I'm hoping, right, maybe you can clear this up for me that there is some planning happening behind the scenes for that, or are we going to have a lot of brownouts in the next couple of years?
No, there are a lot of smart people working on this and forecasting, and we want EV adoption to ramp as quickly as possible. We need to meet our climate goals. But you're right that there will be shocks to the system if we move quickly without that visibility and transparency.
What do you find most interesting about working in energy?
Oh, so much. What's most interesting? Well, one of the things that I love most about talking to utility customers about how they use energy is that there's so much variation.
Hmm.
There's different user needs based on whether people are renters or homeowners, based on what people have in the home. Some people have gas and electricity, and other people just have electricity.
Yeah.
And some people have huge households, with 10 plus people, and other people live alone. And so, how much control you have over your energy use and how much help you need from your utility in making better energy choices and what that looks like is so widely varied. And so, I just feel like it's really hard to get bored because
Yeah.
every time you feel like you've got it sorted, right, there's another population you need to think about all of a sudden, like you have to start thinking about like solar panels. How do those overlap with people who have electric vehicles? There's a lot of nuance to dig into that I find really fun to think about.
You think like some of the design training you had has been helping you here, or is it something you just had to learn while you were at Opower?
Yeah, all the design fundamentals are the same here as anywhere
Oh,
else. But
wow. Great.
you need to focus on the end customer. You need to use, all the tools in the design thinking toolkit to really tie our solutions back to who we're designing for, right?
Mhm.
That's like at the core of what we do and what I've been focused on at every past job as well. But what's novel is just the scale of what we're working
Right.
on, right? Our audiences everyone potentially who uses utilities, right? So we really need to think broad. And also just how fast moving the utility landscape is these days.
Hmm.
Things in utilities historically haven't changed that quickly, but now with things like the IRA passing and with climate effects really ramping up, we're seeing an unprecedented moment in the utility landscape where we really need to move a lot faster than we ever have before. And that's a really exciting thing to be working on and is really different for me compared to where I'd worked in the past.
The IRA is the Inflation Reduction Act passed in
Right.
2022. What have you seen like where you are in terms of how that's affected your job? Has it started to trickle in yet or not yet?
Yeah, our regulatory team has really been digging into it and understanding the impacts on the industry. I think we're all excited about it and are really hopeful that this can be an accelerant towards some of the measures we know we need to get end customers to take, specifically around weatherization, electrification, some of the larger actions that will really help set us up to have a more climate resilient building stock in the future.
Yeah. Okay.
So that's one of the areas where we've been taking a look.
So this makes me happy that we this that has caused a little bit of a shift in the energy industry because it's so important to be I'm preaching to the choir here, moving towards clean and renewable energy for our climate. And I'm glad that it's happening.
Yeah, we are too. Obviously, for me personally, like I want to move as fast as possible. This is just something that I care about on like not just a professional level, but also personal level.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like it was the personal side of things. You mentioned you were very connected or interested in being involved in climate action. Was that something you've been doing since you were in college, or when did you really get involved in that?
Well, I've always cared about climate change, but for most of my life, it was more intellectual or in the background, I guess. I grew up living in 8 different countries and,
Oh wow. Which
climate
ones? Which one?
well, I'll
Can you
list them.
remember?
Yeah, yeah. I was born in Uruguay, and I also lived in Ecuador, Saudi Arabia, Aruba, Brazil, Hong Kong, and the Netherlands, as well as the US.
My god.
And since living in the US, I've actually lived in 5 states, so moved around here too.
Do you like to move around, or is this just what's going on here?
Well, growing up, I didn't have much say in the matter, right? It
Well,
was
sure, yeah. Yeah.
my parents' jobs. But, since growing up, I've moved for school and for work. So never was I just like, I just think I'll check that place out. There was always a reason behind it. But I guess you'd say I'm more comfortable with it than maybe a typical person would be. But I mentioned that just because a lot of the countries that I lived in are very climate vulnerable places. And so it feels more personal to me. I
Yeah,
feel
I
like
can
I
imagine.
understand the global effects of climate change from having personal experiences living in some of those places, like the Amazon. I lived in Brazil. Like that is a place I've been and I can, you know, remember being there. And other places I've lived in New York City. The flooding during Sandy, right, is also like very close to home for me.
Yeah.
I also lived in places that are, projected to potentially become uninhabitable due to extreme heat in the future, like Riyadh in Saudi Arabia. So for me, those things added up to really drive me as an adult in my career around 10 years ago to say, like, how can I do more? Like, how can I sort of take my career that I've been building and working up to and think about what's going on in the world and do the most good I can with the skill set that I have.
Yeah. Well, solutions, right? That is their skill set can help there with creating solutions. And that's a huge, if not the main part of this season of Climify is to get to these practical solutions that we have. They exist and it's just like the willpower, the political willpower to implement them. And I'm going to read a stat to you that I got earlier this week. And if you've heard it and if you've if you can, I guess, talk more about the statistic too, because it's a good statistic. So the IPCC report recently came out, which wasn't so hopeful and nice. But I read here in a study that was funded by the Department of Energy that the US will reach 80% clean power, which I want you to define for me, clean power this decade. And it's a lot of it's thanks to the Inflation Reduction Act or the IRA. And that puts the US on track for 100% clean energy by 2035. Is that something you've encountered in your job? And can you just talk more about what clean energy is and why we can be so hopeful now about our future?
Yeah, I'm curious to dig more into that stat. If you want to send me some materials, I can take a look later. But
I will.
you'll hear some, I guess, the major difference in like the climate community and how we define clean energy, right? Is do you mean renewables purely, or do you mean carbon free? And the distinction
Yeah,
there, where you consider nuclear, right, to be clean or not. And
that's a
there,
good question. Yeah.
not everyone will agree on whether that
So
should.
that's why when I saw clean, I didn't see the word renewable. I got excited when I was reading this. It's from the National Renewable Energy Lab.
Okay,
So
great.
that's where it came from.
Great. Well, I obviously don't know how they're defining it for the purposes of that study, but that is helpful. The work that I do is more on the demand side than the supply side. So I'm not very involved in how utilities make decisions around like what is in their power mix, right? So what I do is to work with my team to say, how can we make the best use of the electricity that's on the grid and gas too,
Yeah.
to make sure that none of that is being wasted. Like if someone is going to use a therm or a kilowatt hour, how can we make sure that it's actually improving their quality of life? It's not,
Right.
going to like heat or cool an empty house.
Right.
A lot of people don't understand how their actions actually show up, not only on their utility bill, but also, in their overall energy use. So just helping connect people more to their everyday actions and showing them what the end result is can help people make better choices and make sure that like we really are maximizing the stuff that's on the grid, and really like then encouraging utilities to move that grid to be the cleanest source as possible.
And we're like the listeners here, designers, everyday Americans, right? We're on the demand side of the energy grid, right? We're obviously not, unless we have solar panels in our house. We're the demand side.
Yeah, demand side, unless you happen to also work at a utility, then you
That's
might
true. That's
be.
true. Right. Then you're both, and that happens, right?
Mhm.
When you're on your job, you're leading the design team. How are you thinking about I would probably say like many audiences in the US when you're designing your products, like what what kind of process are you going through? Because I'm imagining it's pretty challenging, right? To create these tools, I don't know what you call them there, for us to encourage responsibility and to see our impact.
Mhm. Yeah, most of what we design is communications that use behavioral intervention. So our all of our work is steeped in behavioral science to give people the information that they need to make behavior change, to actually like change not just how much energy they're using, but also when they're using it. For example, if they're with a utility that is worried about peak use, like
Mhm.
we have products that encourage people to use less during those peak hours.
Products, is it like apps, or tell us more about what you mean by products?
We have a lot of outbound email campaigns that have deep personalization baked in to reach out to people with information about like their home and their energy use.
Mm.
So there's a lot of outbound work we do, but we also have web experiences that are designed for utilities to embed within their experiences that can help people dig into their energy use and to understand like how does my use compare to last month or a year ago? How does my use compare to other people's? How does my
Mm.
bill down. Like all of these different experiences are things that utilities can buy from us and show to their customers.
Yeah, I get one every month, and I think it's coming from I have a Nest, which I think is now owned by Google, and I don't know how I feel about that, but they send me this email and it shows you how much I used last month and how much I used this month, and I feel like I'm the good thing is I think that makes me feel competitive and like I want to do use less energy than the month before. And sometimes I do, but if it's cold outside, that's tough.
Yeah,
It's blankets and sitting on the couch if I don't want to turn up my heater.
definitely. Yeah. Yeah. A lot of that is, like you said, a combination of personal choice and seasonal changes, which we're
Mhm.
very sensitive to in the
Oh
work that
yeah,
we do and put together. But yeah, that's exactly the same type of thing that we do, except Nest probably is just focused on your HVAC, whereas we have
probably.
entire home,
Yeah.
our meter data. And so we can parse out the HVAC and show you how that is actually trending. Like we have the ability to disaggregate to specific end uses.
Oh,
But
wow.
we also can show how things like laundry are looking
You
or
can get that detailed?
Mhm. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I need this. I want
We have a very large data science team.
wow. Now is it all through like I would say like information graphics? Is this pretty much what you find people respond to better, or is it how do you show it all?
Yeah, my team does a lot around information visualization and chart design, as you can imagine. Like everything that I just laid out is
And chart, yeah.
basically a data point, right?
Pretty charts.
Right, pretty charts. But people don't necessarily change their behavior because of the chart alone.
Yeah, probably
So
not.
it's a combination of the data, right? And then the why behind the data. So letting people know, hey, this is what you should care about here.
Yeah.
Uh, or this is good or bad. Like there's a sense making component to our design work where we'll have the chart and then we'll also have a gauge or a call out next to it saying like, hey, you should feel good about this. Or like, hey, maybe
Oh,
you
so
should
it's positive reinforcement.
in the case where you deserve it, right? And
Yeah,
maybe
well, yeah.
when you put a nudge, right? But I think that it's really important to have those things live alongside each other because if it's just the chart alone, we're leaving people up to their own devices to like understand if they should feel good about it or not. But we actually have the information on what the population is doing at scale to like basically interpret it for you. So we don't want you to have to do that work. We
Yeah,
want to be
thank you.
able to
That's
help
good. I
you.
don't want I don't have time for that.
Yeah, as well as give next steps. So that's the third component that's really important in our communications is we never communicate data without a next step you can take. So we always have a tip or recommendation associated with the data.
Well, that actually is one of my questions I had ready for you today, and that is what actions do you really want the energy customers to take after they see what they did last month?
hmm It's so dependent on the person and the household because different people have different abilities. Like I mentioned before, if you're a renter, you might be more limited in terms of what actions you
Oh,
can
yeah.
take
Yeah, that's
compared
true.
to like a homeowner who like might be able to like insulate the attic or something like that. But there are certain things that are great for people to think about across the board. One is that the like sort of like largest drivers of home energy use for many people is heating, cooling, and hot water heating, right? So thinking about that and seeing what changes can be made there is something that we're often suggesting to people in our communications. As well as thinking about any, like, larger structural changes that might make sense for them in their situations. Like, not everyone can get an electric vehicle or solar panels, but,
Right.
that within your ability, that's a huge thing you can do.
Yeah, I mean, you're living in New York City or living in a big city, and you're renting, and you get this email. What or is it printed? It's you said an email campaign earlier.
I have print reports as well
Oh, you do?
for,
Okay.
yeah, home energy reports.
What would be like your best recommendation for someone renting in terms of they could do besides turn off the lights when you leave the room, as we hear every day at my university?
Yeah. Well, if you're a renter on a time of use rate where you have different rates for electricity at different times of day, then being really mindful of your use during those peak hours is a big thing that you can do for the health of the grid, for the climate, and for your wallet, because those incentives are all aligned in that case. So just being sure to not do the big stuff during peak hours, like
And that's
laundry, washer.
yeah, that's like laundry. Is that like around? I'm guessing peak hours around dinner time when everyone's getting back from work, or when are peak
Exactly.
hours?
It does depend based on where you are in the US or the world, because it depends on your energy mix. Like, for example, if there's a lot of solar on your grid, then you'll start to see more pressure on the grid when the sun goes down, right? Because then that
Sure.
solar capacity. So that's something that happens in California, for example. Other regions that don't have quite as much solar might have different peak hours where it's more usage dependent, like you mentioned, when people are coming home and everyone is cooking dinner and,
That makes sense.
running every.
You're right. It is extremely complicated. And that system, wow. So do you find yourself like, do you consider yourself like a systems thinker
You have to be to work in utilities.
to be?
And I just feel like I'm scratching the surface myself in terms of my own knowledge. And that's what I really love about my current role is I just feel like there's so much more to learn. And I honestly work with a team of people who know so much more than I do about most of these topics. And I love being surrounded by smart folks where I'm learning new things every day about the grid, the environment, the market dynamics, the utility landscape.
Well, you'll be glad to know that later in this season, I have a panel of three systems thinkers coming on the show to discuss just that and how they work as designers and systems thinkers and what resources they use. So I'm plugging that show, but definitely something for you too.
Yeah, I'm really excited to listen to it. I'm curious to learn a little bit more about where they are and how they're applying systems thinking to solving this problem. Because from where I sit, there's almost two extremely complicated systems that are interfacing with each other. One is the the utility system, right? The grid.
Right.
And then the other is people.
People, yeah, we're not predictable sometimes.
Yeah, and everyone is not operating on their own. They are operating as part of a system where people
Mhm.
are talking to each other. People are paying attention to their neighbors and what their neighbors are adopting or not adopting. And that affects adoption trends. Like, people are much more likely to get solar panels, for example, if their neighbors have solar as well.
Yeah.
So there's like these
I've heard
two,
that.
yeah, exactly, like, of the grid and then society that are like crossing over and affecting each other.
That's the whole keeping up with the Joneses, right? They get a new car and you got to get a new car, but solar panels.
And we've basically productized that because our core insight in most of our communications is how much energy your neighbors are using.
Hmm.
So we make that visible to people so that people can sort of like have that internal motivation to keep up with the Joneses, drive them towards better energy behaviors.
Yeah, I used to get that. We did switch our energy provider to be more into this community solar program, which I'm happy about, but I don't get as many of those, if any. We used to get a visual printed chart of how we compared to the neighborhood, and it made me competitive again. I was sometimes very upset about how much energy we're using compared to our neighbors.
Yeah. One of my favorite stories that I like to talk about at work is a research participant who I interviewed a few years ago who was talking about how he wished that we'd stop sending him information about how he's doing compared to his neighbors. And I asked him why. And he said, I'm always doing better than my neighbors, but I don't need to hear that. I just want you to tell my neighbor that he's losing
That's
to
true.
me. So in terms of being competitive, he was like, if you could just text all, you lose again. Like that would be great. So yeah, people really do get very into it. Like he said, he screenshots it and texts it to his neighbor
Seriously.
whenever because he's friends with his neighbor, right? But
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, there you go.
yeah, but people do sort of like turn this into like a friendly competition. We hear also about people printing out our communications, or in the cases where they're getting a print report, sticking it on the fridge. So
Yeah.
showing the rest of the household, how they're doing. And when we hear stories like that, it just really goes to show how people have sort of turned this into almost a game for themselves in a way that really does drive good behavior, which
Yeah.
is our hope.
Yeah. Way back in the first season of Climify, we had on a woman named Katie Patrick who talked about like gamification. And I do feel like she was onto something. And it seems like you're kind of feeling the same way.
Yeah, I love her
Oh,
thought
you're aware of her?
leadership. Yeah, she has actually a really great podcast that I listen to as well. I think it's called How to Save the World.
Yeah. How to Save the
Well,
World.
I am a Climify listener myself, and I
Are you
also
really? I didn't know that.
yeah, I love your podcast, and then I
Oh,
also
thanks.
listen to Katie Patrick's podcast as well.
Oh, perfect. Yeah. One thing that came up for me a number of years ago was I was talking to this psychology professor who's a whole other interesting character, which is the topic of another podcast. But he told me, and I've always remembered this, that it's easier to change small habits than bigger ones. And I'm wondering if that's something that in terms of the behavioral science that you're using there to motivate energy actions, is that something that you've thought about or that you do?
That's a fascinating concept to dig into, and I hate to say it depends, but it depends.
Light. Everything is right, so nuanced, right?
Uh, and one of the things that it depends on is a concept that we call internally like moments that matter.
Mhm.
So there are certain transitional moments that people have. For example, moving into a new home or getting a new family member if you have a baby,
Yeah.
or switching to community solar, for example, like in your case. So all of these moments are moments that change people's relationship with energy, and it makes them open to changing other behaviors or habits around their energy use. And so I would say whether it's a small habit or a big habit, like how open people might be to changing it is highly dependent on where they are in their overall journey with energy use and their utility, and whether they're in one of those transitional moments that makes them more receptive to larger change, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. It does. Yeah, I wonder what then so the stat I read to you a little bit earlier was about, I think it was 80% clean energy, which debatable what that means by 2030. What do you see from your vantage point? You're in the weeds there, literally, with working in energy out in the world. And what do you see coming up for us in the next 5, 10 years? And don't make me cry because maybe tears of joy is okay.
Well, there's a big push in our space around electrification, which I think is
Hmm.
because if we can move end uses towards the electricity grid and also at the same time green the electricity grid, we have an opportunity to really move our energy use towards more sustainable long term carbon free futures as opposed to natural gas, which has a ceiling in terms of how clean it can be.
Right.
So that's a major trend. And I think going along with that, there's a trend around revisiting the building envelope. So thinking about like air sealing, insulation, thinking about, just how we can ensure that, like I said earlier, like every therm or every kilowatt hour is actually going towards improving quality of life and comfort and not going like straight out the window, so to speak.
Right, right.
And so the more we can do those two things, as well as really keep a focus on energy efficiency and getting people to make choices that encourage them to be mindful of how much they're using.
Mhm.
Those things together really will help us get to a better energy future.
Yeah, I hope so. And I'm hearing the work that you're doing there, and I'm thinking about AI, and I'm thinking about smart homes, and I'm thinking about UX designers, and I'm wondering what your thoughts are about, or your maybe inside information about, are there products coming that, like the Nest, for example, or some of the digital thermostats, which are giving you much more like detailed and important information about your energy use. I'm imagining them in my head because I watch so much science fiction, but I'm wondering if it is just that science fiction or if it's coming.
Well, I think the science fiction technology we need, many people in the US already have in their homes, which is their smart meters. So, smart meters are
Ooh, what's that? I need
AI.
that.
Yeah, I think you may have one already based on what you've told me about your home. So it's a meter that talks to your utility about the energy use in the home more frequently than once a month. So historically, the meter would keep track of how much energy you were using, and then someone would come by your home and read the meter, right? And then
Hmm.
bill you for that amount, right?
Oh yeah,
But there's no information beyond that in terms of when you use that energy.
yeah.
So with this new metering infrastructure called AMI that many people currently have in the US and more every day, we're able to get down to the hour or even the 15-minute level in terms of what is happening in terms of energy use in the home.
Okay.
And what that lets us do is that lets us understand like how much of this energy use is happening during like those peak hours where the grid is really constrained. And can we help people be really targeted in their behavior change to really focus on those times when energy is most important to reduce? And it also lets us do things, like I said before, around disaggregating to different end uses because our data science team is able to take a look at that data about like what's going on in that home on this more granular level and say like, hey, this 2 hour period, there's like an energy use fingerprint that looks a lot like someone running a washer and then a dryer, right?
Hmm.
We can attribute that use to those end uses and actually give people more detailed feedback around like what they're doing when and
I
help
see.
them understand like which end uses would most benefit them to rethink or change. And so when you say like a sci-fi future, I'm like, we're getting there. We're
I
getting there.
know.
Technology that's currently in the home, a lot of people just don't realize the benefits there. And, it's really our job to like help people understand the power behind some of the data that we're currently able to collect and report back to customers today.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunity there for designers, even design educators in the classroom, to think about projects where it's taking what you're telling us and say, what would that interface look like on your wall or on your phone or on your TV, or something that can motivate behavioral change. I love the ideas of positive reinforcement because that always gets to me, like going back to getting that gold star on my
Mhm.
spelling assignment in third grade. So that always motivated me to do the same next time. So
Definitely. And I think you're right that there's so much opportunity around different channels. And one of the things that I think a lot about is like what makes sense for a push channel and what makes sense for a pull channel. Like what makes sense to provide to people where they can go in and dig in if they're like noticing something weird on their bill and really understand what's going on. And then what makes sense to alert people about where they don't necessarily have to like remember to go dig in themselves, but we'll just let you know if something is weird,
yeah,
right? There's
can
this
rely
whole
on you.
concept in UX that I've thought about a lot at past jobs as well that is highly relevant here because people don't necessarily want to dig into their energies and spend their time digging in on a
Oh
website
no.
when it's competing with like the new season of Ted Lasso or whatever.
Oh
You know,
yes. Ted
uh,
Lasso.
might be more interesting looking at, right? So it's also on us and the utility and, other players as well to be more proactive, to say like,
Mhm.
"Hey, even though you haven't been paying attention, there is something going on here that like you might want to look into because it's costing you a lot of money."
Yeah, like, washing all your clothes at dinner time.
Right, or like charging your electric vehicle when electricity is most expensive. Like that'll really get you.
Ugh. Yeah, I can imagine if one day I have one, I'll know not to charge it at certain times because, like,
Mhm.
I guess, like, I'm thinking a little bit here as the cynic, and there's some like individual versus collective actions that are coming into my mind. And so the sad fact is that, 100 companies are responsible for like 71% of all of our global emissions. And, do these little individual things matter about plugging in your car? I get it matters to your pocketbook, but I'm interested in your thoughts about that because it's something that I hear as kind of a rebuttal from people a lot. Like, it doesn't really matter because these companies, they're messing it up anyway. So what can you really do?
Yeah, I have heard the same thing as you, and I thought about this a lot myself before I took this job, right? Like I'm in it to make the biggest dent I can in
Yeah.
carbon emissions.
Yeah, me too.
And so in thinking about where to go, should I go work in like corporate sustainability? Should I go where I am at
Hmm.
Opower? There's some other place where I can have the biggest impact. And ultimately, I think Opower is a really exciting place to be for that dichotomy for a couple of reasons. Like, first of all, the individual versus the society is like not a real dichotomy, right? Because society is made up of individuals. So when you
Sure.
think about like, should we focus on those 100 companies you mentioned, or should we focus on individual action? At the end of the day, those companies are made up of individuals,
Yeah.
and individuals have a lot of influence over how companies operate.
Yeah.
And so I think that split has maybe not served the climate community by sort of pitting two groups against each other who like need each other actually. Like
Yes,
we need
that's true.
every person to care and act, and we also need to operate at a societal level. And one of the ways that we get there is to get the individuals to influence each other, which is what our products are really focused around,
Hmm.
in order to push society as a whole towards a more sustainable place. So I have a statistic actually that's really exciting around some research that we did with the Brattle Group, thinking about basically from the utility point of view, like how much the supply side matters versus how much the demand side matters, because that's
Right.
kind of the individual versus collective split in my world, right? That we're working within. And same thing, it's a yes and conversation. It's like we
Yeah.
need to focus on the supply side and we need the demand side
Yeah. Good
involved.
old improv. Yes. And
Yes, and yeah. And so the stat that I wanted to share is that the Brattle Group found that if we boost customer actions in even just like a minor way, by 2040, we could avoid 534 MMT of emissions, which is the same as closing half of all US coal power plants.
oh, wow.
That's, just purely by engaging people on an individual level to focus
Yeah.
on
That's what you
electric
do.
efficiency. Exactly. Like using behavioral science and all of the design tools in our design toolkit. And I think that that's so exciting because that's not going to solve climate change on its own. We still need the supply side involved too,
That's true.
right? But the end customer piece of the puzzle is a big one. And it's one that we have the tool to motivate today because, like I said, using design thinking and all of the tools that we have at our disposal, we already know how to engage end customers. And so we need to not only like do that, do it well, and keep innovating around that space, but we need to do that in addition to all of these other things, like not one or the other.
I'm excited about that because I do think that with some of the new things coming out with AI, that there is some even bigger possibilities because the technology is just it's just really shifting more quickly than I ever thought it could. And I'm looking at it from a hopeful perspective, like you are. So one of the unique things about this show is that we ask the guest, you, to switch shoes with me, the design educator, and help us create a design project or a design class with the knowledge that you have to impact or to increase the climate action of our design students. So if you were to teach a class or a project, it doesn't have to be a class, knowing what you know, what would you do?
Well, something that I think would be really interesting for any climate design classroom to dig into is to just focus on one of these populations of energy users and say, like, what might the best engagement solution look like for them to
Hmm.
get that back, right? And you can define that any way you like. Like, you can define that based on end uses to say, like, let's think about the best energy engagement solution for solar customers. Or you can think
Yeah.
about income, or you could think about locations. Say, like, okay, like let's look at people who are in really arid, hot climates and think about
Yeah.
like what information they need if they have huge seasonal swings in their use. You can think about people who have like really leaky homes, or you can think about people who, for example, have huge families with a lot of people who they live with who are not engaged and don't care.
Yeah.
We often hear from people who pay the bills saying, like, "No, I wish my teenagers cared."
Yeah.
They're not the one paying the bill, right? So what do people like that need to get from us? How can we provide the right information, the right behavioral nudges, the right next steps to take to get all of these different populations to resonate with the information we're sharing, understand what they need to do to act, and then, get them over the behavioral hump to actually make a change and then see the impact and get that gold star you're talking about at the end
I
of
yeah. I'd love some more gold stars.
it. We all
Well, it's been a pleasure having you on the show, Karina. I think it's been very informational, especially from the energy side, the very practical things that we all can do, and the hopefulness of that these individual actions are extremely important. So I thank you for that. Where can we find you online again? Where can we learn more about the work you do?
Yeah. Well, first, I just want to say thanks so much for having me. This has been a pleasure. It's always fun to
Oh,
zoom
you're
out
welcome.
the day to day and think about the big picture. You can find me on LinkedIn with the latest Twitter drama. I guess I'm less active there than I used to be.
That's a lot of people are saying that to me. Like a lot of
Yeah.
people are.
I have an unspellable name. So the best way to find me is probably to look at the show description and just copy and paste.
Your name will be spelled out. Just copy and paste
Yeah.
and write it to LinkedIn.
Right.
Well, it's been great having you here, and thank you for spending the past almost hour with me.
Again, thanks so much for having me again and take care. Have a good rest of your day.
Climify is produced, edited, and engineered by me. A huge special thanks this season to Ellen Keith Shaw and Christine Pilot for their gorgeous work on our new branding. Matul Rashid and Mark O'Brien for their continued design help. Bianca Sandico as our new podcast manager. And Brandy Nichols and Michelle Wynn for their strategic guidance and always supporting me on helping to improve the offerings of this podcast. If you enjoy the work we all do here and you have a spare minute or two, we would truly appreciate it if you left a rating and review over at Apple Podcasts. The more folks that review our program, the higher the algorithm pushes up Climify in the search results. And in turn, the more likely we all can learn how to become climate designers.